Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Are you on the hunt for indie podcasts with a dark side, but you're not quite ready to commit to subscribing to a new pod? Why not wet your beak with Spotlight on Darkcast? Each week we drop a new episode from one of the many shows on the Darkcast network. Here you'll find true crime, brew crime, petty crime, retro horror, classic horror, true horror, spree killers, thrill killers, serial killers, breakfast serial killers, true paranormal, histories, mysteries, frauds, cheats, swindlers, two-timers, double-timers, four-flushers, cryptids, cryptography, astrology, virology, pathology, epidemiology, and people that fuck around with Ouija boards. Explore Spotlight on Darkcast. It's like dozens of superlative indie podcasts in one weekly package, and it can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. Spotlight on Darkcast. Fuck around and find out.
Hey, this is my disclaimer. Blah, 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 blah. I use swear words. Get over it. Blah, 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 blah. True crime, blah, blah. If you're 6 years old, go away. Blah, 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 blah. Warned. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow. True crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. Find me on the socials. Facebook at Beyond the Rainbow. And Rainbow Crimes just about everywhere else. I have a Buy Me a Coffee account for a one-time support and a Patreon account should you want to help support the show. To become a patron, simply go online to patreon.com/rainbowcrimes. I have two tiers, the $3 Rainbow tier and the $5 Unicorn tier. The Unicorn tier includes a unicorn that I'll house at my Seabreeze Studio stables, and I'll name it just for you. You will also get ad-free episodes, early release episodes, and one Patreon exclusive episode per month. And I have a new patron to welcome, Dharma! Thank you! For you, my friend, I've chosen the fiery red-maned unicorn I call Jubilee. She will be housed for you here with me, and ready for you to take a ride on our next Patreon exclusive episode coming up in just a few days. Dharma, you're a rock star. I don't get out much anymore, I'm afraid. Aside from a quick trip to the beach or the park to walk my dog or the grocery store. But last weekend, I went to a cute little pride event in a local park in my community. There were a couple handfuls of booths. I went around and I handed out some podcast stickers to folks I saw there. I told them a little bit about Beyond the Rainbow, and then there was one booth that I stopped at that I just adored. It was called Free Mom Hugs, and it's a nationwide organization that was started by a Christian woman who has a gay son. In order to show support for her son, she became an LGBTQ+ advocate. While advocating, she realized just how many LGBTQ+ people are rejected by others. Some are even rejected by their own mothers. She started out small. She first went to a pride event in her home state of conservative Oklahoma. She wore a pin that said free hugs or high fives. The program is actually more than hugs. It's designed to promote LGBTQ visibility and to open up conversations. And that I am so down with. LGBTQ+ needs to be talked about in a positive light. I still say that people fear what they don't know or understand. The fear is what leads to hate. If you talk about something, educate others, the fear dissipates and it becomes weak. Therefore, so does the hate, and hopefully, so do the crimes against us. I'm seriously considering joining Free Mom Hugs, although it might be for some selfish reasons too. I really miss hugs since COVID started, and then I moved to a state where I don't know anyone. The lady running the free hugs booth, her name was Sarah, she gave me 2 hugs. Why did I get 2? Because I freaking sparkle, that's why. With that, let's get into our case. Aside from her underwear, the 18-year-old girl was completely naked as she lay partially face down in a mud puddle. She was still alive. She was bleeding badly from 65 slashes upon her body. As her assailants pulled away in the car from where the girl lay on the deserted logging road, they had no idea the girl was still alive. But even if they did know, they didn't really care. They thought it would be a long time before anyone found her, and they knew she was too weak to try and walk away. Within minutes, the girl would drown and bleed out in that mud puddle. She had mud that was forced into her mouth, and she had been slashed across her throat with a box cutter. She'd been beaten, and she was stomped upon. The girl was Stacy Hanna of Virginia. Her murder took place July 27, 1997, about 15 miles south of Richmond after a few summer rainstorms had come and gone. There's many things about this case that reminds me of a couple other cases that I've already covered. One was Nicholas West of Texas. He was the young man who was abducted by 3 men, taken to a secluded area, and then the men beat Nicholas and left him in his soiled underwear curled up in the fetal position to die, also in a mud puddle. The other case is that of Shanda Scherer. It happened 5 years prior to this case. Shanda was a 12-year-old girl who was abducted by 4 girls older than her. She was beaten, she was stabbed, and then she was driven around in a trunk of a car until her 4 abductors lit her on fire and finally finished her life off on an old logging road. The case this episode also has 4 young women who were the killers. The 4 abducted Stacy and they put her in their trunk, drove around with her, and then they ended up on an old logging road where they savagely took her life. But let's go to the beginning of how this case unfolded. Try to hang in there with me, warriors. There's a lot of names, and at times the course of events get a little confusing, especially with all the characters involved. 18-year-old Stacy Hanna had just moved from her hometown of Lynchberg, Virginia, to Richmond. It was a spontaneous move for her. She was only in Richmond helping one of her friends move, but for some reason she fell in love with Richmond, and she decided it's where she wanted to live too. As soon as she got her belongings together, she started to look for a place to stay and work. Work would find Stacy first. A little coffee shop employed her immediately. Through her new job, she made a friend named Dana, and Dana introduced her to another young woman. This young woman was Dana's roommate. Her name was Kelly Tibbs. But Kelly went by the nickname Turtle. Dana, Turtle, and another girl named Robin lived in a house in the Belmont section of Richmond. Turtle's on-again, off-again girlfriend, Tracy Bittner, had just moved out as her and Turtle were off again. And I'll refer to Tracy as Bittner from here on out, because Stacy and Tracy sound very similar. Stacy was super excited to be making like-minded lesbian friends so quickly, and Dana and Turtle invited Stacy to come live with them. Stacy was ecstatic, and she accepted the offer. Stacy even started to develop a crush on Turtle, and it wasn't long before the 2 young women began a romantic relationship with one another. Things were starting to come together for Stacy in her new grown-up life. She had a job she liked, she was getting friends, she now had a place to live, and she had a new girlfriend. Stacy had it all. For a few weeks. After the new relationship novelty wore off, Turtle started to bore of Stacy. She'd also caught Stacy in a couple of lies, and lying was on her list as a relationship deal breaker. Besides, Turtle wanted to get back with her ex, Bittner. July 24th, 1997, a light physical altercation occurred between Stacy and Turtle. Turtle caught Stacy in a lie, and the two began pushing each other. Turtle's friend Domika Winkler was partially involved in this physical altercation as well. That dispute was quickly resolved, although I believe it was just the tip of what was to come. The afternoon of Saturday, July 26, just a couple days later, Turtle, Dana, and Stacy were ready for a party. At the party, they met up with Bittner, Domika, and another friend named Stephanie Cole. 2 other girls came with Bittner. One was named Sandy and the other was Leslie. Bittner and Sandy seemed to have just started to date, which didn't make Turtle happy, seeing how she wanted to get back with Bittner. And it was becoming painfully clear that Stacy liked Turtle a lot more than Turtle liked Stacy. Stacy would do or say just about anything to keep her relationship with Turtle going. She was extremely jealous of Bittner. So that night at the party, Stacy started to make comments to Turtle all throughout the evening. Comments such as, Bittner and Sandy looked like they were very happy together, and they made such a cute couple, and just little remarks like that, and it was definitely getting under Turtle's skin. When the party ended just before midnight, the girls that I mentioned before who went to the party ended up back at the Belmont house. As Stacy, Bittner, and most of the other girls went into the living room, Turtle pulled Sandy aside, and she started to question her about her relationship with Bittner. Sandy told Turtle that her and Bittner were not as serious as Stacy made it sound. A little while later, Stacy, afraid that Turtle and Bittner were going to rekindle their relationship again, told Turtle another lie. Stacy pulled Turtle aside and said, Bittner asked me to tell you this. She doesn't want a relationship with you again. Turtle was sure that Stacy was lying based on previous lies she had caught Stacy in. About a half an hour later, Turtle left the house with Bittner, Domika, and Stephanie to pick up another friend who was just getting off of work. In that car ride, the girls discussed Stacy and her lies. Turtle found out that Bittner had never said anything even remotely close to what Stacy told her. In reality, Stacy's lies were catching up to her. Turtle was livid with Stacy by now. She was amping up and fueling the other girls in the car with a fiery anger towards a deceiving Stacy. Turtle wanted Stacy to pay for the lies. She decided that they would drive somewhere, they'd beat Stacy up, and then they'd make her walk home. When the carload of girls returned back to the Belmont house after picking up their friend, Turtle invited Stacy and Dana to go with her and the other 3, Domika, Stephanie, and Bittner, to Marsh Field in Chesterfield County, Virginia. It was to be about a half an hour drive near the Chesterfield airport. So Turtle, Bittner, Domika, Stephanie, Dana, and Stacy all loaded up into Stephanie's car, and they headed on their way to Marsh Field. On the car ride, Dana started to feel sick because the young women had been consuming beer all night. So when they got to the destination, Dana stayed in the car. Stephanie, the driver, stayed in the car as well. You see, Stephanie has a very bad case of rheumatoid arthritis, and often she was wheelchair-bound. She was not as mobile as her friends were. The other 4 young women all got out of the car. They stood in front of the car for a few minutes, and then they proceeded to walk to the other side of a small building. Once on the other side of that building, Stacy's ass-whooping began. First by Turtle and Domika. They threw the first punches and kicks when Stacy was knocked to the ground, and then Bittner joined in. In no time, Domika produced a box cutter and began slicing at Stacy. The box cutter continued to change hands from Domika to Turtle to Bittner. Domika found a cinder block. She picked it up and she smashed it down onto Stacy. She also had a belt she was striking Stacy with while the other 2 cut Stacy with the box cutter. The whole assault lasted about 10 minutes before Turtle, Domika, and Bittner returned to the vehicle and drove off. A few miles down the road, the girls discussed Stacy opening her mouth again and telling on him. They were fearful they were going to get arrested for assault, so they turned around and drove back to where Stacy lay. With the headlights on, Dana peeked out the windshield, and she could see Stacy. There was a lot of blood down her back, but Dana, still sick, remained in the car. The bulk of the girls decided to put Stacy in the car and drive her somewhere more remote. Stephanie told the girls to put Stacy in the trunk. She didn't want to get blood all over her car. Stacy pleaded to ride inside the car with the rest of them, but the other girls wouldn't have it and they shoved her in the trunk. A few miles down the road, Stacy was banging on the interior of the trunk. Stephanie stopped the car. Domika got out. She went and she opened the trunk. Stacy begged for them to drop her at a phone booth so she could call her mom. Domika said, "No," and she slammed the trunk door of the car down. The young women continued driving and talking about whether they should take Stacy to the hospital or not. Domika and Bittner said no. They didn't want Stacy reporting what they had done to her. Bittner wanted to cut Stacy's tongue out for all the lies she had told. Domika wanted to cut her fingers off so she couldn't make a written report. But they continued driving until they reached a desolate logging road, and Stephanie pulled over. This time, all of the young women except for Dana got out of the car. They opened the trunk, and they pulled Stacy out. They saw she was losing a lot of blood. They pulled her out of the trunk, and they led her further down the logging road. Stephanie took the box cutter, and she cut Stacy on her back, and then she returned to her car. Bittner, Domika, and Turtle dragged Stacy at least 100 yards further down the road. They took off Stacy's clothes, leaving her in her underwear. Domika demanded Stacy's watch and rings. Stacy begged to keep one of her rings that was very sentimental to her. Domika used her favorite word of no, and then she took it along with the others, and then she had the nerve to spit on Stacy. Domika sliced into Stacy's chest with the box cutter. Then she handed the cutter to Bittner, and she held Stacy down in the mud while Bittner sliced Stacy's throat. Bittner shoved mud into Stacy's mouth, and she sliced her near her heart while saying,
"I want your heart, bitch. Give me your heart." "Why won't you die?"
Bittner and Domika walked back to the car where Dana, who was even more sick now, and Stephanie waited. Bittner started to brag about all she had done to Stacy. Turtle spent a few more minutes with Stacy, and then she returned to the car. Apparently, Turtle had stuck a stick into Stacy's chest before leaving her in the mud puddle. And as a final hurrah, one of the assailants carved the word liar into Stacy's back. As the young women drove away from Stacy, who was barely clinging to life, Domika announced to the carful, "If anyone even thinks about telling anyone what they did, they too would end up like Stacy." The girls disposed of Stacy's clothes and any other evidence at an apartment complex near the Belmont house before they returned. But once they got to the house, the girls began boasting about all they did to Stacy. It was inevitable someone would rat them out. Someone did, although I'm not sure who. The following day, Stacy's body was found by the police. 2 of Stacy's rings were found also. Police showed up at the Belmont house and they arrested Turtle, Bittner, Domika, and Stephanie for the murder of Stacy Hanna. Domika callously told the police it was one of those times where somebody had to die. The detective interviewing her removed Stacy's watch from Domika's wrist. All 4 of the young women confessed to taking part in Stacy's attack, and all 4 women went to trial with their friends testifying against them, including Dana, who stayed in the car the whole time because she was sick, and most likely very frightened. At the trial, Stephanie's attorney would argue because of her rheumatoid arthritis, she was not physically capable of injuring Stacy. Although if memory serves me, this bitch got 1 slash of the box cutter in on Stacy's back. Her attorney said she was less culpable than the other girls, and that may be, but she was involved. The jury found Stephanie guilty. She was sentenced to 20 years, in which she served 18 and then was released. I know that Stacy's mom was heated that Stephanie was released early, but I have to say, rheumatoid arthritis is a life sentence. I have a friend in Louisiana with it, and I feel horrible for her and the pain she is in daily. Stephanie definitely has a life sentence with the rheumatoid arthritis. The other three were all found guilty of robbery, kidnapping, and capital murder. They were all sentenced to life in prison, and that's where they still are today. Rest in power, Stacy. You know, Rainbow Warriors, if you haven't tried Magic Mind yet, you are missing out on a lot of very productive moments in your life. As we all know, life is short and it passes us by quickly. If you can get access to something legally that's organic and will help you get more things you want done, why not go for it? Magic Mind is recommended to drink in the morning for daily productivity, but I'm usually pretty productive in the mornings anyway. I have noticed that about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I start to really drag. I call it my lull time. My brain's foggy and I get super sleepy. But I still have loads more to do. So I take my Magic Mind little green shot during these lull periods, and it perks me right up. It allows me to complete projects that would normally sit until after my nap. And the best part? By the time I'm ready for bed, they don't keep me awake like those other energy drinks or coffee does. No more of those tall cans of drinks claiming to boost my energy but giving me the jitters instead. Magic Mind contains Bacopa monnieri. It's a nootropic that improves your attention span, your ability to process and learn new information, as well as your memory. It's everything I need in order to put together episodes of Beyond the Rainbow podcast. So if you're like me and you need to get shit done and kick ass while you're doing it, you just gotta try Magic Mind. I have a 20% off code to share with you guys. It's Rainbow, RAINBOW. To use it, you can go to magicmind.co/rainbow and enter the code RAINBOW at checkout. And they have a money-back guarantee. So if you're not happy with the product for whatever reason, and you will be happy, they'll refund your money. Also, because the folks at Magic Mind think I sparkle, they're giving you, my listeners, an extra perk. If you get the subscription, it's 40% off. My 40% off code only lasts 10 days, so be sure to hurry. It's also Rainbow, RAINBOW. Our True Crime Quickie this episode comes to us from various places in the United States. It's very sad and so inhumane to me when I hear about the tragic murder of a black trans woman. In March of this year, 33-year-old Chicago, Illinois resident Tatiana LaBelle was beaten to death and thrown into the garbage in an alley. She was found there by sanitation workers collecting garbage. Garbage! Tatiana was not garbage. She was a black trans woman, and there was so much more about her than that. She was a huge fan of Mariah Carey and Patti LaBelle, and she had a family and friends, all of whom loved her very much. No one has been arrested for this crime. June 15th of this year, a 28-year-old black trans woman and activist was shot to death in Milwaukee. Her name was Brazil Johnson. Brazil loved to cook, and she was really good at it too. She was shot multiple times in her own apartment and then had her body mutilated. Her killer cut off her male genitalia and stuffed it into her own mouth. You cannot tell me this was not a hate crime. And from what I can see, no one's been arrested for her murder either. March 26th of this year in Jackson, Mississippi, Kesha Jackson, a black trans woman, was murdered and left to die on a roadside. It appears Kesha's murder was a robbery homicide and not labeled a hate crime. But any justice has yet to be found for this young woman. She had just turned 24 the month before she was killed. There are plenty more black trans women to name, but the last one I'm going to tell you about for this episode is Nedra Sequence Morris. She was a 50-year-old black trans woman. Nedra was shot to death in Opelika, Florida, at an unknown location. After she was murdered, she was transported and dumped at a street intersection. Nedra was described as strong, feisty, and opinionated. She was well loved and respected in her community. She also had an abundance of kindness for those who were good to her. Again, no one has been held accountable for her murder. Last year, we saw 57 trans people murdered in the United States that we know of. What would make that number higher are missing trans folk who had been murdered but not found. Found John and Jane Doe remains, and it's not known if John or Jane Doe was trans. And what's saddest to me, transient trans people who don't have anyone in their lives who are missing them, and therefore no one is reporting them as missing. It's speculated by some that many of these trans murder cases go unsolved and then cold, and it's mostly because police don't know how to advocate for the trans community. Although police are hired to protect and serve their communities, many carry their own personal belief systems and values into their job, and that would make trans people low priority like sex workers and the homeless. And it's all pretty shitty, but it does happen. Rest in power, Tatiana Brazil Kesha Nedra. And a big rainbow thank you to Sinister Steph from Sinister Story Hour for portraying Bittner, the killer teenager in the story of Stacy's murder. Be sure to check out and subscribe to Steph's podcast, Sinister Story Hour. Available on almost all podcast apps. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. And remember, it's not a crime to be gay. Unless you're a murderer.